here, your thrifty apprentice. Happy Wednesday. So in today's video, I have decided to revisit Arteza 12 half pan watercolor paint set. Based on some recent information I picked up, I just felt like I needed to give them another chance. I did review these paints once before. I want to say it was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. And I really wanted to retry them now. As the artist I am versus the artist I was then. See how experience will help me look at the paints differently, and whether or not I still feel the same about the paints, but experience will help me be able to accomplish a better composition, because simply as you paint, you grow. I'm going to be painting dessert, and yes, bear with me on the whole dessert thing, guys. There is a end goal. I promise. It's coming later on down the road, and I'll share it with you a little bit later on. Can't do it now, but closer to the time for the big shebang. Yeah. Then I'll let you know. But in the meantime, let's jump into looking at these paints again. Sort of a revisit. So now these paints originally come in this 12 half pan palette. I've taken the paints out of here, and in their place I'm starting to build a Turner designer gouache palette. So that's what's in there for the, what's growing inside this tin. And the only reason I haven't taken the sticker off is because even with heat I can't quite get it off. So whatever glue is on the back of that sticker is really strong. I've taken the 12 half pans and put them into one of my studio palettes, which has many different paints in it. It has 3 different sets of the Premium marketing paints in here, and then there's an Arteza set, which again I couldn't get the sticker for. But all of the little swatch cards are in here in case I need to reference any of them. I may just make one big swatch sheet for this palette. I'm not sure. I may not. But basically these are Mungio paints all up here. And then these are the Arteza paints, which are not produced by Mungio, I'm pretty sure. I don't think. And if it is, it's a different formulation, definitely. A much different formulation. But these are the ones I'm going to be retrying. I don't know. They just seem a little goopy just off bat from what I remember. I'm hoping it's not going to be too bad. So let's get this set up here. It's different painting with you guys this way. Okay, thrifty friends, as we begin, let me give you a color list. I'm going to be definitely using the primaries, which are lemon yellow and cad light yellow, cad light red, deep ocean blue, Persian blue, and amaranth. I'm also going to be adding touches of yellow ochre or rust red throughout the painting, but basically mixing from those primaries. Now, I'll be very honest, these paints fought me from the beginning. I should have expected that. I had an issue with actually getting washes saturated enough without the paint breaking down in order to put it onto the composition, keeping in mind that I already knew that there was quite a shift from wet to dry with these paints. But I had to continue to layer in order to get the color and the saturation that I wanted. The problem with that is that you really can't layer these paints too much before they start to lift on you. And one of the main points of transparent paints is to be able to see those underlayers to help build an entire composition. And I am a layer painter, I paint in quite a few layers in order to accomplish the composition. So for my particular painting style, I realized once again, these paints fought me more than they helped me, although I was okay with the composition that came out at the end. Now, what I've done here is cover the cake in a wash of the cad yellow mixed with the yellow ochre. Then around the edges, I dotted in some of the rust red, which is more like the burnt sienna color, in order to add a little bit more brownness to it. I mixed the ocean blue and the Prussian blue together just a little bit, and then added a touch of rust red to darken it. And that's what I use to try to emulate and get that blueberry color. As far as the strawberries were concerned, that was amaranth for the most part. Cad light red came in here and there. The cad light was the original layer, and then for mass tone and shadows, I used the amaranth, which eventually I end up mixing Prussian blue in, which gave it more of a violet tone, and that's what I used for some of the shadows. Now, the other shadow color that I'm going to eventually mix will be Prussian blue with the rust red to give me more of a Payne's gray. The thing is, this particular set does not have an ultramarine in it. The deep ocean blue is more so towards the cerulean cyan side of things. And then, of course, we know Prussian blue is much more purple leaning, much deeper shade than ultramarine. And I'll be honest, I was actually missing ultramarine in this set. So if I paint with this set ever again in the future, I will just grab, since it's in that palette with all of those Mungio paints, I'll just use one of the ultramarine colors from there to add into it. The paints were still just as, goopy as I remember. They just kind of, if they get too wet, they are going to cake up on your brush. So this is definitely one of those sets that I suggest mixing the color out on your palette versus painting directly from the pen to the paper. Because I really would hate for you to get so far with the composition and then mess it up by putting a big glob of paint on the paper simply because the paints were goopy in the pan and it just carried that goopiness over to your paper. So definitely mix them out on the palette. I use quite a few brushes here, mainly my dagger brush, which I am becoming more and more accustomed to using and getting all types of strokes and brush marks out of. I am finding that other than a cat's tongue or a cat's tail, however you refer to it, I really like daggers. And I think this is a dagger striper, if I'm to be exact. And this is Master's Touch. It is a golden Tacklon head on it. But I really like this brush. As a matter of fact, I like Master's Touch brushes. I think they make really decent brushes. I would hold them in comparison against Royal and Lane nickel brushes, but that's just my opinion based on my painting style. So here you'll see that or what you have seen me doing throughout the composition is basically just going in and etching out each of the shapes. Now for those leaves, I actually mixed the green versus using the convenient greens that were in the set. I'm sure I could have mixed several shades of green from the greens that were included in the Arteza set. However, I really wanted to keep color harmony and unity. I was already using several colors, so I just decided to mix all of my shades of green from the primaries that I was using, mainly the cad light yellow mixed with the deep ocean blue. And if I needed to darken it up in as I went along to add in shadows for my leaves, I just mixed in Prussian blue to make sure I got a darker saturated tone. I decided to make the ice in white, so I used the gray mixtures that I had made in order to add definition to the white, simply because, as we say all the time, white will never be white. It will always reflect things around it. It will always have some type of color or detail in it. Now, you saw me just cover the cake with a second layer, and that layer was actually just yellow ochre. I could not get the punchy, vibrant look that I like with these paints, and less with these paints than with a lot of other paints. Actually, they look so saturated in the pan, but that is just not how they paint out. And of course, the telltale sign to a paint being full of optical brighteners and fillers is if when you open the set, you can automatically tell what each color is because they're just so bright and in your face. Keep in mind that transparent colors are deep. And a lot of transparent colors, you cannot tell that color by just simply looking at the pan. You have to swatch it out. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. I'm kind of babbling, going back and forth here. As you can see, I'm splattering because I felt like the composition was a little sparse and I wanted to add some pizzazz to it. And then I'm going to throw on some highlights, and that's going to bring me to the end of retesting these paints. Again, they are pretty much exactly what I expected. Dotting on some seeds here for those strawberries. The composition wasn't terrible. Okay, friends, that brings us to a end. We have finished up that particular composition, and those paints are exactly as I remember them to be. Now, I do believe that I was able to paint with them differently, because I'm a different artist at this point, and I'm more sure about my strokes and secure in the final composition that I'm trying to create. But the paints don't layer well at all. I took the composition as far as I could, before I just felt like continuing to paint would lift the paints off the paper. Now, I could have enhanced it a little bit more with colored pencil, but that would have really turned it more into a mixed media. And I'm trying to keep all of these dessert paintings strictly watercolor, and I've been able to do that up to this point. I mean, other than bleed proof, which is gouache, which is still water soluble. So also the paints really disintegrate in water. They break down really quickly in water, and although they re-wet really easily and really well, it takes a lot of paint to really get pigment payoff, which in turns uses up a lot of the paints in the pan really quickly. You even more so, I have even more divots in the paint now than I did when I originally started, and that's just off of one composition. Let's see here. Ended up with some pretty murky, nasty looking water there, and I know you guys can't see it, but there's like this little funny grittiness floating around in the water. I noticed that same grittiness in the actual breakdown. I don't know if you guys can see that, but like inside there's like this grit, and it's not granulation. It's almost like little particles of sand or dirt or something. Now, I know that with some dye-based pigments, if I'm not mistaken, they kind of like infuse the dye onto like a chalk or some substrate of that sort, and it that's in layman's term is sort of a way of making like a lake pigment or a lake color, and that's typically the case with dye, with like a dye-based paint. And I really believe that these paints are more dye-based than pigment-based. Of course, finding any type of pigment information on these paints right now is next to impossible. And this is 2.5 years later, still not able to find much pigment information on the paints. There is an entire thread online that's been up for a few years on this particular subject over at wetcanvas.com, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, in my revisit of these paints, for the purpose that I revisited them, if the direction I want to go in is anything like this, then I'm going to go in a different direction. I mean, I don't have anything against dye-based paints. I use a lot of them. I just think that there are better quality dye-based paints than these particular ones. Now, I really wish I knew what factory these paints were produced in. They don't remind me of anything that I've really used before. Maybe the Master's Touch 48 half pan. Maybe it reminds me of those a little bit, but those paints are not as goopy when they dry. I've seen this surface texture on another paint. I cannot remember which one it is. It really kind of reminds me of the surface texture that I got on those DDD Praise paints from Temu. I'll link that so you guys can go check that out. Which the paints weren't terrible, but it was definitely, you could definitely tell that the pigments were dye based. Some of those pigments definitely had to be cosmetic based as well. But there you have it, my revisit on the Arteza 12 half pan. I still feel, I still feel pretty much the same way that I felt about those paints back then. They would not be my first palette to suggest. They definitely would not be my go-to palette for painting. You could pull a composition off with them, don't get me wrong. Um, it didn't turn out terrible at all. I was definitely able to get the point across with the composition. But the road to getting it to that point was a little rough, and it shouldn't have taken me as long as it did. But due to the quality of the paints, it did take me quite a while to finish this up. Although for you guys, it's going to be time lapsed. Well, that's kind of it. That kind of wraps this up. I will relink the original Arteza review. Again, the artwork that we did today is going to be so much better than the artwork that you see in that review, because I was a different painter back then. But even with the artwork not being as great, I was still able to get a really great feel for the paints. And I cannot think of anything that I would change based on that review. Actually, I probably would give them a much harsher review if I was to be reviewing them now, considering I know all of the particular qualities that I'm looking for in a watercolor paint, the differences in what makes it student grade versus professional, what makes it a less quality budget grade versus a higher ranking student grade, how those different categories fit into my particular style of painting. So the truth of the matter is, if I had have done a in-depth review on these paints at this point, then more than likely the things that I say would be much harsher than anything I said in the review video when I originally shot it. So yeah, Arteza Premium 12 pan half paints. Premium is a very, very, very huge stretch to even put on those paints. I would just miss. Definitely not mine. I wasn't doing a star scale back then, but on a student grade star scale of 1 to 5, these paints probably would get about a 2.5. And I'm giving them a 2.5 because you can paint the composition regardless of how much trouble you may have getting it accomplished. All right, thanks guys. Hopefully you heard, saw, picked up on something in this review or in this video, because it wasn't really a review, it was sort of a revisit overview. If you saw anything you like, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Share the video. Sharing is caring. If you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed, or you're returning and you haven't, go ahead, hit that subscription button and that notification bell so you can be aware when all of the new content come out. Hit up the comment section. Let me know, what do you think? How did the painting come out, considering the type of trouble? Have you ever used Arteza 12 half pan? If you have, what do you think of them? And if you haven't, run. Run. Check out the video description for all of the relevant links. The Thrifty Apprentice Facebook group, where we do all things artsy and crafty there. You can check out the most recommended product list, which I need to update it, but the link is there and I'm going to be updating it over the next couple of days. And there is the Patreon, where you guys can join. Patreon now has full-time tutorials that are going up. The first one was the macaron painting that came out on the macaron painting that came out on Valentine. It has a time lapse on YouTube, but the full-time demo is over on Patreon, and it's a very, very reasonable, economical $2 a month. You get traceables for things that we do here on the channel. You get behind the scenes series called Thrifty Real, where I kind of show you periodically the things that's going on behind the scenes. And now you're getting the full-time videos, one full-time video a month. And that's all for the reasonable price of $2. So, if you guys want to support me, you can do it there. You can also check out the Etsy shop, where there are custom-made journals. 2 of them made to order, others are ready ordered, shipped straight out. So check it out if you decide to support the channel. I'll be so grateful. Thanks guys, and remember, as I tell you at the end of every single video, just keep painting and crafting.